Welcome into the podcast, guys. I am here with your friend Ben DuBose from USA Today and Clutch fans, and we're here to talk a little bit about the deadline for those rookie extensions that came and went today. And the Rockets did not get a deal done with Tari Eason, which creates a first among their drafted players of the past few years, and that's setting up potential restricted free agency next summer. Ben, what was your what you thought going in, and to see this actual outcome? What were your thoughts about the Tari situation?
Disappointed, but not surprised. When we did our post game episode the other night, you asked me about a percentage, and I said 51-49. It was really close because even though both sides talked a big game and the Rockets have gotten so many agreements over the years, including a few months ago with Jabari, who, like Tari, was drafted in that same 2022 first round. And then you had the Kevin Durant agreement on Sunday morning. There were all these vibes, and the Rockets have done such a good job of keeping their guys, the ones we know they value. And Dave, you and I have talked enough behind the scenes. We know they value Tari Eason. This is not
Yeah,
that the Rockets don't like him as a player. They absolutely do. And I think he's going to be very important to their success this season. But the reason I was 51-49, despite all the positive reports, and I think in hindsight, all the leaks of being hopeful, I think it was maybe hoping that because there's so many other guys that are taking these deals, that the vibes would sort of carry the day, that everybody's finding a way to keep this team together, and that Tari would eventually do the same. The reason I was 51-49, this situation is so unique in that the gulf between the Bull case and the Bear case is wider than any player I can remember, other than Jalen Green. Now, that's the one comparable that I threw out when we talked about this last week, Dave. But the difference between Tari and Jalen, now they're not identical in terms of the risk reward factors. With Jalen, it was more the nature of his play, the hot and cold. With Tari, there's a little bit of that, but it's more the injury history. Now, Jalen took that shorter term deal, and I don't know if that was available to Tari, but even if it was, I think it was less appealing to Tari than it was to Jalen because Tari's 24 years old. He's going to turn 25 in May. Jalen was 22, I believe. So Jalen was at a point in his career where if he took a shorter deal, not quite the AAV that he would want, and it's higher than I'm sure what Tari was offered. Like Jalen was offered in the 30s. I don't think Tari was anywhere close. Can't confirm that, but just reading context clues, I don't think Tari was offered more than Jabari. My guess is we're talking somewhere
yeah,
in the 15 to 20 range.
yeah.
That's mostly uneducated, but that's what I think we're sort of looking at
I
here.
agree. I agree. Yeah,
With Jalen, he was young enough to where he would be 24, 25 when he came up again. And if he played well enough, then he could get the deal that he wanted. And that's why we heard Jalen's agent this time a year ago talking about how he actually had the potential to make more than anyone in his draft class if it all panned out and he got that next deal at the full max sooner, which he theoretically could have by taking, I think it was a 2-year deal with a player option for year 3. With Tari, if he were to take something similar to that, and it would not be starting this season, it'd be obviously starting a year from now, he'd be 27, 28 years old when, and that's if it was even offered, that deal would get him to his next contract. And at that point, I don't know if he'd be getting a 4 or 5 year offer. So, long story short, with Tari already in his mid 20s, I could see him driving a little bit of a harder bargain for, hey, this is my one chance. I need to cash in and get that 4 or 5 year deal that can give me,
right.
generational financial security. And I just don't think it made sense for the Rockets at this point in time. And it sucks because I think the Rockets would love to, but the sample size just isn't there in terms of mostly the injuries, but also, he didn't look good in the playoffs either. There are some questions with his style of play. I think the Rockets want to believe in him. And if he goes out and has a good season, I think they would love to give him whatever deal he was wanting today. I suspect they'd love to give it to him in July if it turns out that his play this season warrants it. And it's obviously it's not a guarantee. I mean, if he plays good enough that he could potentially, outkick the coverage and be ahead of the market. But or his market could be ahead of what it is today. I mean, that is a little bit of a risk. But I just don't think it would have been responsible for the Rockets to bid that aggressively today. And from Tari's perspective, I just, I think he wants to stay. This has nothing to do with him not wanting to be with the Rockets. It's just if he believes in himself, and why wouldn't he? He's 2 years removed from surgery. He's had the issue, cleaned up. If he thinks he's capable of more and he's talked in the preseason about wanting a bigger role, wanting more opportunities, he would be selling low on himself to take what his production would offer today. And so to me, that's the bottom line. I'm not too surprised because it's just tough for the two sides to get in alignment right now. If he goes out and has a healthy season in 25, 26, they might next summer. But right now, the gap is just so wide. When you look at, Tari's camp, I'm sure is pointing out the analytics numbers, all the metrics that love him, the tracking data, and saying, well, if he's healthy and he has had the issue corrected, this is what he's going to be. And the Rockets are saying, yeah, but here's what he's actually done. And so to make that bet at this point in time, it would just be irresponsible. And so I don't think either side wanted to wait, but I just think that, the circumstances sort of forced it.
Yeah, and I'll echo what you said before. I mean, we both know that the Rockets really value Tari, so I'm sure they wanted to sign him. But like as you said, I think David Weiner, Beam a Thug on Twitter, said it really nicely, where he said, "A good deal is better than no deal, which is better than a bad deal." And I think Tari wants a lot now. I think that basically creates a scenario now where he probably wants to go out and get his value in the open market next year. And I want to talk a little bit about that because in the Rafael Stone era, Rafael has gotten a lot of praise, and deservedly so, for signing his guys and getting them. He has not had a max guy yet, and he's gotten them at good values overall. I'll throw KPJ in there, even though they traded for him. They got him just before the deadline. And, as much as I criticize that deal, it still was only a 1-year deal. It ended up getting away from it, with very little damage. And then Jalen Şengün, Jalen's contract was easily traded. Şengün neither was a max guy. Jabari, not a max guy. He's gotten them all at what most people would consider to be really good values. Tari's now the first one that's going to go out into something restricted free agency that we as Houston Rocket fans are very familiar with, just not this front office hasn't had to deal with it. I mean, Rafael knows what he's doing in restricted free agency. I'm just saying they haven't had that deal with their rookie guys. But the Rockets, they have plenty of experience with this. Daryl Morey's, era Rockets had tons of restricted free agents, and a lot of it worked quite well. If you remember, Kyle Lowry was a restricted free agent at one point. Carl Landry. There were a few that didn't work well, and Luis Scola, because he leveraged outside of the NBA as a contract to leave, and then of course Chandler Parsons, which was the one that was the one of the worst case scenarios, if you will, where somebody goes out and maxes a player that isn't necessarily worth it. Do you see a scenario like that where Tari he's an extremely valuable defensive player? He's not a franchise player, but he's he's a solid offensive player. A little chaotic, but solid. And he is an excellent defensive player. Certainly, as far as how well he creates chaos, he's half of the Terror Twins. Do you see a scenario where somebody comes out and just blows, the projections the Rockets have out of the water, and they maybe lose him? And furthermore, we'll talk about this because Mike mentioned this in the chat. I'll bring his comment up. Does this increase the odds of trading him? And that's another part of this that you have to consider.
I don't see how it doesn't. Because you're going to have to make a decision by the time you get to late January, early February, and you'll also have more data on your point guard situation post Fred VanVleet, both how the internal guys are playing, as well as what the odds are of Fred actually making it back by the time you get to April, May, and June. And so you'll have much more information overall as far as, do you need a bigger move? And if you do need a bigger move, then you're going to potentially have to use Tari as the main trade chip in that. And so I think it's very dicey because in some ways, the better he plays, the more likely it is that you might have to consider trading him. Because if he looks, and I sort of consider this scenario unlikely because he's going to be starting the year a 6-man. Steven Adams is starting tomorrow as we expected in Oklahoma City. So I'm not even sure how much Tari is going to play to put up the types of numbers that could change his market. But if he ends up playing a ton and playing really well to the point where offers that could go beyond not just 20 million, but 25 million, take you into the second apron are in play, then that might increase the odds that you have to consider dealing him, because even if you are sort of 50-50, you think maybe you can keep him, but I'm not quite sure. Well, if you have him as a restricted free agent, you can't trade him without his consent. So you're very limited in your options. So if you think you might lose him and his play is sort of tipping the scales, or maybe it goes the other direction, it's just the chemistry isn't right. I don't buy the notion that he's not going to play hard or that he's going to truck. No, this isn't 2000 anymore. Like, if he goes out there and doesn't play well and he's a, malcontent and his efficiency dips, then that's going to decrease his market value. Like, he's not at the level where, he can pout his way out like James Harden and people will give him the benefit of the doubt. That's just not going to work. So no, I think he's going to play hard. And in terms of how well he plays, yeah, unfortunately, there's a scenario where if he plays too well, then you might have some sort of hard conversations behind the scenes in terms of, hey, do we want to sort of reshuffle our payroll to, have a little bit more wiggle room to fit him in? Or conversely, if not, do you think about moving him? Like, I think, especially in light of what happened with Fred VanVleet and the obvious deficiencies that they have at point guard, at least, deficiencies might be too strong because they like him in Reed, but the obvious questions that they have at point guard, then yeah, there's enough there to where I don't see how it's not at least a conversation, especially because if he's a restricted free agent, you can't use him in trades next summer. Like, there might be a small chance you could sign and trade him, but you take that as a bonus if it happens. If you aren't able to retain him and then somehow a sign and trade gets you some value, you don't plan on that. So if you're not sure that you're going to keep him, then the deadline is the time to move him. So yeah, to answer the question that you threw out there, I don't see how it's not a bigger option right now.
And that's the tough part, right? Because you traded Dylan, and you had a wealth of these sort of switchable, strong physical defenders. I would say Tari, Dylan, men certainly, and Jabari is a little bit more of a versatile type defender, but you could maybe lump him in there as well. You lost Dylan, you added DFS to Dorian Finney-Smith to replace him, but he's out currently right now. If you lose Tari in some capacity,
and Dave, by the way, I'm sorry to break up the chat.
No, yeah.
Houston legend George Springer, holy crap, just hit a 3-run home run down by 2 in the bottom of the 7th of Game 7.
Oh,
holy! And with all the crap that got thrown at him by, Seattle fans and all that, if George Springer ends up winning Game 7 and preventing the Mariners from getting to the World Series, which they never got into, what a Houston story that would be. They still got to get 6 outs, but oh my God, that was sorry to cut you off, but
no, actually, I guarantee my brothers are flipping out at this moment, because I got to tell you, I hate the Dodgers with an absolute passion, but I would actually root for the Dodgers.
100%, same.
And it's crazy to say that, but anyway, I know we got off on but that's fantastic. I love George Springer, and I'm really happy to see that. So that's great. Hopefully, Blue Jays pull this off. It would be and soul crushing for Seattle, which is a nice benefit.
Back to Tari.
Yes.
Who, by the way, I think has some Seattle ties. So there's our connection.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
absolutely.
Bad day Seattle for people Hooper. From Seattle. Hopefully the Texans can keep the thing going, although I think they're down 7-0. Whatever.
I forgot about the days when I used to say how Rafael Stone would just,
his Seattle ties with
Hoopers.
KPJ, yeah.
Absolutely.
And now Kevin Durant and Jeff Green. There we go.
Paolo Banchero and but it's just that if you move him, look, if you put him into a deal where he makes $5 to $6 million, it's not going to get you into it could be a piece in a Giannis trade, but it's not going to be your main salary. I think that's one thing that I will give Rafael a ton of credit for is him being able to get these contracts at good deals, and then they're tradable after a year at a much larger, more value appropriate, sum. And he won't have that situation here with Tari. So Tari's going to have to be, if it's a bigger type trade, included with another deal, a larger deal. So, but my point was, if you do trade him, you do lose another key piece of your defense. And, is Amen, Jabari, and DFS, when he comes back healthy enough to still give you that identity that has been so key over the last, couple of years. We'll see. That's a bridge they'll cross later on. But I do worry a little bit, because I think a two-way guy like Tari will be valuable. Somebody could come in and just say, you know what, we're going to put Houston in a bind because they do have a lot of contracts there. And by signing them to X amount, that could maybe push them into the second apron. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. It's more of a Beam-a-Thug question, but that's the only concern I have. But for the most part, I am a very pro restricted free agency guy. It's very hard for players to go to a cap room situation and get the sum that they want. It's very difficult.
Now, I saw on Clutch Fans today, there was a thread that pointed out an article from ESPN, I think it was in August, saying that in contrast to this summer, when only 3 teams had significant cap space, next summer it could be as many as 10. So the idea is that as team friendly as restricted free agency was this summer with, Cam Thomas, Josh Giddey, Jonathan Kuminga, those types, it might not be as much next year. However, I am curious what significant cap space means, and ESPN didn't define it, or at least it wasn't in the thread that I saw recapping the article. The key numbers to me are 20 and 25. 20 in average annual value, you could do that and still have the taxpayer mid-level exception for another upgrade and still stay below the second apron. 25 is the second apron as the roster is currently constructed. And then anything above that, then, you have to think long and hard. I mean, you could match, but it would put you in, Phoenix Suns territory in terms of how, boxed in you are with your roster and unable to do anything else. And maybe the team is good enough this year. Maybe they win 65 games and you say, hey, like, you got to do it. And if that's the case, you treat that as a good problem. But I think that's unlikely. I think it's more likely to be one of these middle ground scenarios, especially Tari starting the year as a 6-man. And so I'm just curious, like, how much of the significant cap space are we talking just, MLE level, or are we talking a lot of teams that go above 25 million? Because that's the key number. When you get, like, I know Brooklyn has that much room. Beyond Brooklyn, I'm not sure, because that's where.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more this year than there were this past season.
Yeah, there's more. I don't know if it's 10. So like, how much is, there'll be a lot of teams in the 20s, but it's the teams that are in the 30s, the 40s, and even more. Those are the ones that you really have to worry about because, they could throw out an offer sheet and it really wouldn't even be that big of a hit to them because they have more money that they could deal with. So yeah, I would need to crunch the numbers more, and we'll have plenty of time because, I don't think the Rockets will really look at any deals until closer to the deadline. I think, at this point, they want to get more information on Tari. They want to see him have a good season. They want to see how the team plays. They want to see what happens at point guard in the absence of Fred VanVleet. I mean, at this point, the Rockets, I think, are just in sort of like fact-finding mode. They want to gather more data. And I think it's just sort of punting it back until December, January, February, and then they'll have some, some hard conversations, because if it's on either extreme, if it's really bad from a chemistry perspective and it's just not working out, or the flip side, he's so good that he might be pricing himself out of your market, then in those two scenarios, you can't help but, consider moving him as opposed to risking losing him for no compensation. And if it's in between, then yeah, you just, you have the conversations internally. Hey, are we more comfortable paying him what he wants now? You touch base with Tari to make sure that you're still in alignment. Because, one reason why I don't think we'll hear too much behind the scenes as far as how it went down, the Rockets very much want this relationship to stay good. So I don't think this will be like a, if you recall Brooke Lopez 2 years ago, when those negotiations broke down and the Rockets are talking to everyone, wink, wink, including us behind the scenes about, the way things went down early in July 23.
Yeah, I remember.
I don't think that's going to happen here because you don't want to poison the well. I mean, he's obviously on the team right now, but secondly, like, I do think they value Tari, and in a perfect world, they give him the deal he wants next summer when they feel more confident in being able to, meet that figure that he values himself at. Like, clearly, Tari's taking the bull case and he's entitled to do that. He's not doing anything wrong. I really object to the people saying that, oh, all these other guys are sacrificing. Why won't Tari? No, I think what happens in most of these cases, both sides maybe give 10%. Like, there's the bear case, there's the bull case, and then maybe knock 10% off of what you think you deserve, and it's close enough that a deal gets done. In this case, I think the sides are so far apart that even if Tari knocks off 10%, even if the Rockets knock off 10%, it's just not close enough to where a deal can get done. And so, ideally, his play this season will make the Rockets comfortable enough to where they'll go the extra mile and say, hey, I'm confident that he's going to be worth it. but yet it won't be so good that he plays himself into like a
Yeah.
$30 to $40 million a year player, because then you go into the problems that that we were just describing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. Did you have more you want to say?
no,
Oh,
I mean that's basically the crux of the matter, is that you're trying to find the sweet spot, but in terms of, you know, will we learn how it went down today? I doubt we will, because they don't want to make it seem like that that they're making him out to be the bad guy, because they still want this to have a positive resolution, and it
yeah.
can. And so this isn't going to be a situation where I think, you know, juicy tidbits leak in the Chronicle or the Athletic or ESPN. No, I think it's going to be fairly hush hush. They'll say, you know, this is a unique situation because of the injury history and because of his age. It's not like any of our other core guys. It's, you know, it's clearly not what either side wanted. Like the Rockets' value being projectable, we've talked about that. Like the team's going to get more expensive. They want to be able to plan this
Yeah.
out. Eli Whitus, like he's thinking years and years in advance with his luxury tax, first apron, second apron planning. And, you know, Tari wants the financial security. I'm sure being through, going through what he did the last 2 years, it's got to be hell for him. And it makes sense for both sides to want a deal. It's just what the
Yeah.
number actually was.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
just
That's
not
it.
there, and
Yeah.
I
And
think the
that was
Rockets will do
asked.
everything
And
they can to keep the door open.
exactly. And I know you kind of mentioned they're probably in the 15 to 20. I think that's probably where they were too. I think they were under 20 is my guess per year. And I don't know if that's where Tari wanted to be 20 and that's the holdup or what, but we don't know that for sure. We just know the Rockets value him. And Rafael has been out, and that's his background. Rafael is a lawyer. He worked the contracts before he was even the general manager. He knows his contracts and he's done extremely well with those contracts. So I trust him in handling this. And I think, you know, so we don't know what's going to happen with Tari this season, whether he's traded or what. But now looking ahead to the next summer, you'll have that, and then you will have your first max contract, at least, you know, barring the unforeseen.
Yeah.
You will probably have that window open immediately, and the Rockets will have a max announcement for Amen Thompson
Yeah.
at that time. So
I think so
you know,
too.
all these other things, you know, Jalen, Şengün, Tari, Jabari, even KPJ before that, there's a scale of what you think that value is, you know,
And
somewhere between max and minimum, and that's the fight. But with Amen, it's going to be probably very clean and easy, is my guess.
and on Rafael, you can't praise all of the wins he gets in negotiations and be too upset with today. Like
Right.
you don't get the wins they've consistently gotten on these player contracts if you're not willing to drive a hard bargain. Like if agents and players think that you're unwilling to walk away from the table, you're not going to get the deals the Rockets have. The Rockets, they won all these negotiations in part because they didn't think that or the players didn't think that they could get better by waiting them out. So if you drive a hard bargain and they've gotten so many deals, well, this is just, you know, it's a double-edged sword, as with anything. Like they are really committed to walking away from the table. If you want to get the best deals in life, you basically have to. I think that's a, you know, a fundamental principle of negotiations. If you are pot committed, no matter what, then the other side is going to take advantage of you. So if you like the deals that they've gotten, then you have to understand that the way they consistently get these good deals, it's not because the players and agents are doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. No, they see the Rockets as being, you know, firm, that they're willing to walk away, and they eventually say, "Hey, I want to be in Houston. I want to be with the Rockets." And so they take a deal that's ultimately team friendly. Well, if you're going to have that approach, once in a while, you know, another team's or another player, excuse me, is going to call your bluff. And I think that's sort of what happens here. Not because Tari's necessarily upset with the Rockets. I think it's just circumstances and, you know, the injury history making what he wants a little too risky for the Rockets.
Yeah. And, you know, now looking back that there was no extension done, I do wonder how much writing was on the wall in the sense of Jabari signed his early. It was kind of a
Yeah.
shock. I'm like, whoa, okay, he signed, and then nothing for Tari, which actually, when there was still that Giannis talk, I thought, are they pulling back on Tari so that they can still trade him? I mean, again, that was pure speculation because they were interested in Giannis. You know, and then we saw him at media day where he was quite disappointed or frustrated or whatever you want to call it. I think you nailed it earlier. I think he's going to come out and ball out and play hard, knowing that there's a lot on the line. I don't know if it's going to cause any small version of Cam Whitmore issues where he wants more of a role. I doubt it because I think Tari is a little bit different there and he contributes in so many different ways. But that's just something possible to keep an eye on. But The other thing that kind of maybe tipped us off was a couple of days ago, Kevin Durant signs his extension with the Rockets, which was kind of already established in the
Yeah.
works, whatever you want to call it. He was pretty clear on media day saying, yeah, I see myself signing an extension. I know you knew in advance that was going to end up happening. But they probably were like, this is not looking great. It seemed like they were holding out for Tari first and then having the KD things happen. But KD signs a 2-year deal, 90 million bucks, leaves about 30 to 35 million on the table of what he could have accepted on a 2-year deal. He does get a player option on the second year. So he's got this season, next season, that's under team control. And then he has the option for that third year, including, like I said, this one. And we'll see. But you're going to get Kevin Durant at 37, 38, possibly 39 years old. And looking forward to it. That's going to be tomorrow. What was your overall thoughts on the KD extension?
No, it's a good deal. It's not overwhelming. I mean, when it was reported by Shams earlier this summer that he was willing to take a discount, like it wasn't going to be from, 120 to like 115. Like, what's the point? It was going to be something substantive. I had thrown out, 2 for 100 or 2 for 80 as hypotheticals, and this sort of met in the middle. It was also sort of telling on the Tari front in hindsight that, we had talked last week about how, maybe they were trying to wait for Kevin to be after the Tari deal so they know how much space they had going up to the second apron. Well, maybe the fact that they did the Kevin deal on Sunday was sort of a tell that, yeah, the Tari thing wasn't happening. And obviously Kevin didn't want to go into the season on only a 1-year deal. He's had, bad injury luck in the past. So it made sense for both sides just to knock this out. And it wasn't really connected to the Tari thing anymore because obviously the Tari deal wasn't getting done at this time. It just didn't make sense. But I think it's a fair deal, and I think it's going to be really beneficial. I mean, let's just be clear. One narrative that I would push back on is this idea that, the KD discount doesn't matter as much because you didn't get the Tari deal done. People I've seen on my timeline at least have said, oh, KD did this and then you don't sign Tari. No, I think, first off, Tari is entitled to, go after whatever he thinks is the best deal for himself. I do wonder if he's going to get it being the 6th or 7th man on this team, but if he wants to bet on himself, that's certainly his prerogative. But the other thing is that even if, the Rockets don't keep Tari for whatever reason, okay, then it's going to be useful, this KD discount, to give Amen the max if that's what he's able to command. If you end up trading Tari, then, I've seen some hypotheticals. Would you combine Tari and Fred for Jarek White? Something like that. That could make sense for the Celtics.
Yeah.
It would make sense for Fred because, the Celtics are a good organization.
I haven't seen that. I could see that. Yes, I could see
that. Something like that. Well, that's going to be a salary. Like if you combine those two salaries and you bring in Jarek White, who's at like 30-something million, then that KD discount is still going to be beneficial. So it's not that because Tari didn't sign today that KD's discount is for nothing. No, you're still going to be able to, use that salary to help put a contending roster around, your big three and the current team majority of it the way it's built right now. It just might be a little bit different than the way we had thought it would look, 24, 48 hours ago.
Yeah. And I have to give the Fertittas a lot of credit. They've been willing to spend. I mean, look at what they did with Ime Udoka signing his extension, which was, up there as well. They want to win. They've been willing to spend. I think, looking back to his early days compared to now is significant. We know, I see a little bit of pushback and, I'm not going to, I guess won't call it pushback, a little bit of questioning about Amen being a max guy. Yeah, we have to see how this season obviously plays out, but in his second year, first team all defense, there's so many unique qualities that if he did get to a situation where he was a restricted free agent, I think somebody with max cap room would offer max. And I think this is a situation where he will be max just on how they rank all these prospects. I just think that's what will happen. But again, that's a year away. We also know tomorrow night, we will certainly do post game after the Rockets play at 6:30 Central Time against the Thunder. Rockets missing, obviously, Fred VanVleet, as they will all here, and DFS. OKC is going to be missing Jalen Williams. Still going to be a terrific matchup to watch. The Rockets are going double big. That double big lineup, as you pointed out on the last show, Ben, really kind of tore up OKC. The Rockets have Chet's number. Chet's a good defensive player. He's not the physical guy to stop Şengün, and he's not going to keep Adams off the boards. So watch for Mark Daigneault's, adjustments here. That's what I really want to see what they do with this big lineup. And it's an even bigger lineup now. Obviously, they're starting Amen as point guard and KD and Jabari at the 3. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch that.
For sure.
Tari, you mentioned this earlier, possibly guarding SGA. So we might get a very early look at, how important Tari is and kind of his season to prove himself as far as a contract. So just before we close, any last thoughts on OKC tomorrow?
No, I think it's, a great opportunity without Jalen Williams to go out there and be competitive and potentially get a statement win on the biggest stage. And, I'm excited to see now contract year Tari Eason, to bring this pod full circle. One narrative that I absolutely do not agree with is this idea that that Tari's play is going to suffer based on not giving him a deal. No, I think he's going to be even more incentivized. And no, I don't think he's going to go over the line, because if he's inefficient, if he's not doing it in a team construct, this is not the 1990s and the 2000s. Teams are smart enough that, that'll be a hit to his value, even if he is able to stay healthy. So, yeah, I think he's going to be incentivized to play well. He may play with more of a chip on his shoulder. And, you know, I know you brought up the Cam Whitmore thing from last year, but I still think the biggest storyline with Cam is that he wasn't good enough, especially defensively and with moving the ball, to consistently get on the floor for Ime Udoka. Now, I'm not saying that the character concerns weren't real and some of the off-court things that you heard whispers about, but I think that was more secondary. It's that because he wasn't playing, then there was a little bit more noise in the locker room, and you heard these whispers on social media. Like, I think it's sort of the tail wagging the dog to characterize what happened with Cam Whitmore into it being, an issue of him being a malcontent. No, I think it's more he was a malcontent because, the minutes just weren't there for his development. And that's sort of an occupational hazard when you're a young player with that level of talent and you aren't getting to consistently play. And he just wasn't good enough to play for, at least consistently, for a second seeded Rockets team. Tari Eason is good enough to play for a contending Rockets team. He was last year. He will be this year.
Yeah.
So because of that, I don't see this being an analog to Cam Whitmore. I mean, you can't, never say never, but I think, Tari's going to get a head on his shoulders. I think he'll be fine. He'll be motivated. And yeah, that's the storyline for me. He's got beyond the obvious of, the big three against, SGA and Chet, the defending champs in their house, KD watching the Thunder, put their first banner in the rafters. Does he have some revenge? Those are the obvious storylines, but I also want to see, contract year Tari Eason. Does that lead to an even better version now that he's playing for his next deal? I honestly would not be surprised if it does.
Yeah, and we'll close with this question by generational hater. Why do you think Shams reported that Tari and front office disagreed on multiple fronts? Why say multiple fronts? I think this is just annual value, how much he's making each year, guaranteed, and also the number of years is my guess. And I can't think of anything else. Those would be the three fronts. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, to go full circle, I brought it up earlier in the pod. Like, the only guy from the Rockets, internally drafted guys that I think is comparable is Jalen Green, because he had some of the same boom versus bust qualities, now for different reasons. But I do think there was some of the same dynamic. But I think the Rockets and Jalen were a little bit more comfortable experimenting with a shorter term deal there. They had more flexibility as a team at that point of the rebuild, but also, like, Jalen had been healthy and he was young enough to where a deal that was 2 or 3 years, and if it hits, then Jalen can, get that 4 or 5 year max deal at 24 or 25 years old. The risk reward made sense for both sides, as opposed to with Tari, now that he's in his mid 20s, I think they weren't in, agreement on annual value, how to account for, the injury history versus the upside of the analytics, but also the years. I doubt the Rockets could have mitigated some of that risk with a shorter term contract, but I don't know for Tari at 25, if that was, well, at 24, but he'll be 25 next year when the deal kicks in, if it's as appealing for him as it was for Jalen. And I'm guessing that's the multiple fronts.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, we will be back tomorrow night after the game. Really looking forward to the first post game to just dissect what we see. Also, we're going to have later in the week. Can I say who we're going to have, or should I hold off on that?
I would hold off, but we should have a good guest later in the week.
Yeah, we'll have something interesting later in the week as well. So we're looking forward to that for the game tomorrow. Ben, thanks for doing this. Everybody, appreciate all the support and all the subscribers. We've really grown the last week or two since we started doing this. I think 200, 300, 400 subscribers since then. I really appreciate all the support. So thank you guys. Have a great night, and we will see y'all tomorrow.